Today we're talking about soliciting your boss and cultivating your board. And initially, we may want to ask ourselves, like, why does this matter? Why should I concern myself with this? I'd like to think that probably everybody on this presentation has some idea of why they should care about this, but you may not have great strategies for doing a better job of it. And you also may not have kind of a good reason, a good leg to stand on to make sense of this for people who are serving on your board. Really, it comes down to leading by example. So board and executive financial commitment results in a stronger and more committed organization. And on some level, I think all of your board members are going to understand this. It's easy to point out that foundations and prospective major gift donors are gonna potentially ask about this. You can show your board where those foundations in town want to know who your board members are, how many have committed, and even possibly the total dollar amount that they've committed. The reason for this is that it's hard for the rest of the community to follow, to give whenever those closest to the organization haven't yet given. Strong board participation gives fundraising appeals greater legitimacy to everyone in the community. It demonstrates that the board and the executive team have a personal stake in the organization's success if they're donating at a personally significant level. Next slide, please. All right, forgive me because I'm still flying blind here. All I see is Jared. So the good folks at BoardSource do research on this. And I don't know if you all get emails from BoardSource, but I personally, throughout the time that I've been employed in this field, have actually answered this survey to help them gather this information. But periodically they ask everybody out in the nonprofit world, how many of you have this stuff in your organization? So I'd like for you to take a moment, grab a piece of scrap paper and see if you can match the number on the right, the choice on the right, and match it with the letter on the left. So just make your best guesses at what you think average board giving participation is in the US, what percent of boards have 100% participation each year, and also what percent of nonprofits have spelled out board giving policies. I'll give you a second just to do that. I've finally found the slides, in case anyone was wondering. All right, so is anyone brave enough to speak up and say what they think the average board giving participation is in the US? I can only see a couple of you with your cameras on, but if you want to put it in the comments, anybody want to guess roughly what percent of board members give to the organizations where they serve as high-level volunteers?
3%.
3%. Or I think what you're saying is the third choice there. Yeah, okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, our expectation of our board members is really low, apparently. We're thinking 3%. That's all right. And anybody want to guess at what percentage of nonprofits have 100%? How many of them are like the honor roll of nonprofits that have the ideal board members? Christy's saying 46% have 100% of their board giving. Karen says the same thing. All right. Any guesses out there about what percent of nonprofits have explicit policies around board giving? At this point, we're kind of we've eliminated other options. 68%, Jabari. Some guesses. All right, so Trish, if you could advance to the next slide. So close. Yeah. So if you're in one of those organizations where all but like 1 or 2 of your board members give, there are a lot of you out there. So 74% of 74% of board members actually give to the organizations where they serve. That's how I'm reading this statistic. And then if you're one of those lucky organizations where every single board member gives because they totally understand that they're setting an example for the rest of the community, for how the rest of the community should behave towards your organization, congratulations, you're in the minority. Only 46% of nonprofits have boards that do that. So if you're one of those that has a board member who's a holdout, don't be surprised. Look to your left, look to your right. There are plenty other folks out there in the same boat as you. And then Javari, your guess was absolutely right on target. A little over 2/3 of nonprofits have explicit board giving policies, but by my math here, even though you have explicit board giving policies, there's still 20% of the board members that decide to ignore those. All right, so next slide here, Trish. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is just some tips and tricks to solicit your boss and cultivate your board. So we want you to have some tools in your toolbox for making this happen. We're going to talk a little bit about how to establish a culture of philanthropy in your organization. It can be a really slippery term. What exactly is a culture of philanthropy? What does it mean? Tips and tricks for setting this up, for making that culture stronger is going to include things like regular reporting and communications. We're going to talk about how to set up the ask because, you know, just like your board members will say, oh, no, I'm too close to that person to ask them for money. They're my friend. I can't do that. Sometimes it can be hard to ask your supervisor for a gift. And finally, the concept of peer solicitation and how effective that can be in getting board members engaged with giving significantly to your organization. All right, on to you, Michaela.
Thanks, Mary. So let's start at the very beginning of setting you up for success in, making sure you're set to solicit your boss, whether it's your board chair or your president, CEO, executive director, and making sure you're cultivating your board in a way that's compelling to ask for their support as well. That really begins with this culture of philanthropy that Mary just mentioned. The belief as an organization that philanthropy and development conversations should be integrated into all aspects of your operations. So you'll see this image, we start with the core, and that's your leadership, your board, your executive leadership team. How do you get them invested in this process? From the get-go, early on in your conversations, I encourage you to talk to them about what their vision is for a strong culture of philanthropy. What would they like to see for your organization? And take it to the next step. Ask, how should we measure this? What are the metrics that we deem important to track along the way? You as the fundraiser in that approach are kind of flipping the dynamic. Often we find ourselves as fundraisers going to our board and saying, you should give. This is your expectation. It's in your bylaws. You should care enough to contribute to this. But if you ask for their voice, for their involvement, just like with any major gift, you're in a position to say, this is what you told me earlier on. This is what we agreed on as an organization. How can I help you achieve that? Here are some of my ideas. You're now in a position to work with them as opposed to working at them. Throughout the year, I encourage you to think about how you can use positive examples to highlight progress as related to your culture of philanthropy. Maybe you take a moment and highlight a board member that really helped push a solicitation forward for you, or go to that organizational support ring, bring it a little bit broader. At your board meeting, highlight a volunteer that's not even there and explain, so-and-so brought in 14 new prospects this year, and 6 of them are already giving at our annual gifts committee level. What success in our culture of philanthropy development. Share progress, get people excited and invested, and help them envision how they can participate in establishing a stronger culture of philanthropy. I've mentioned board meetings, but it doesn't end there. Bring philanthropy and development into the conversation on your staff meetings as well. Is there an integration of development strategy in your marketing communications strategy? How about your operations? It all needs to work together to build a strong culture of philanthropy. And that's what's going to set you up for success in soliciting your executive leadership explicitly. So we've talked a little bit about kind of how to hit that core group, that leadership group, and flip the scenario so that you get to work with them as opposed to at them. In this next slide, please, Trish, if you could click ahead, we're going to talk about what your role is, or what the expectation is of you as the fundraiser to cultivate these relationships throughout the year. I encourage you to think of your president, CEO, executive director, board chair, any board member as any major donor you engage with. They deserve the opportunity to be cultivated just like any other donor. It's important to bring them into the fabric and the joy of giving in the same way that you would with any other that you're asking for support. We sometimes get into this mentality that they're on the board or they're the president. They should really know why we need to focus on philanthropy. But is that the most inspiring way to engage someone in their generosity? Perhaps not. Take time to show your board why their giving is critical and explicitly outline your expectations. We talked about, 46% of board members participating as donors early in that matching exercise. I think we should aim a little higher than that, right? And maybe it's 46% because are they even asked? Explicitly state what you would like. Is your governance chair, as a part of the recruitment process, telling prospects, we hope that every board member will consider a gift that's significant to them and their family? Is your board chair mentioning this at board meetings? Is your president mentioning it to your board? Are you mentioning it explicitly to them, or did you just send a pledge form? Yikes. You also want to put it in written communications as well. Sometimes people just process that information a little bit better if it's written, or they can return to it. Not only should you be consistent in your expectations along the way, but be consistent in talking through your timelines. Give a time frame to your board members. Just sort of this ambiguous, we hope you support, doesn't help you out. But if you outline what your development team is doing and where you're focusing, perhaps you say, we're working on an end of year campaign where we're really focused on our mid-level donor segment. Our staff is going to be hyper engaged in that area. For this reason, we hope to help support you secure either your contribution this year or a pledge regarding a contribution by May. That gives you a specific timeline to operate off of. Invite your board to conversations about their giving. This is an area many nonprofits kind of fall short. You should have one-on-one conversations with every board member. Why? Because just like with any major donor, you can probably learn a little bit more about how to get them to their best gift. If they designated to a particular area, would that inspire them at a greater level? Do they work for a company that has matching gifts? Have you ever asked? Have you ever even kind of gone down that path? Did they know to ask? Did they work for a company that might be able to contribute as a business donor? These are the reasons why having those one-on-one conversations can be so meaningful. It's also a way you can talk through a potential pledge with them. Just sending a pledge form in the mail and hoping they remember your giving expectations might not be the most fruitful for you. And then this next piece, I think, is perhaps my most favorite, and just a challenge that I encourage you to think through. Often in our meetings with our board and our executive team, we talk about cumulative giving, or that contributed revenue that we're attributing to the board for our goals for a year. It's in your budget. And we'll often report we're 70% to goal, 50% of our board is given. Please give. That's important information for you to share with your board, share with your executive team, absolutely. But is it really going to inspire them to give and get invested? Perhaps not all of them. Again, treat your board, treat your executive team like any other donor. Put their giving forward as impact towards your mission, towards your organization. For example, perhaps you work for a clinic and you can go to your board and say, I just want to thank you all for contributing this year. The board together gave at a level that enabled us to keep the clinic open an entire extra week. That is the contribution impact of this board's giving. What that enabled us to do is to free resources to expand our services. I can't tell you the impact it made in our providers, our service providers. They were very impressed by the way we run our operations, and it really spoke to them, your personal investment, not in just your time, but in your generosity as a board. And perhaps most importantly, we saw many more patients this year because of your care for this organization. So thank you. That's a little bit more compelling and exciting. It gives the group something to rally around, right? You could even take it to the next level and bring it back to that culture of philanthropy and highlight, somebody on the board or a volunteer that really helped you get there. For example, your board chair, Jane Miller, she helped meet with half of the board and supported your development staff in doing this. So you can thank her publicly in that space. Jane Miller met with half of you. It was wonderful to work with her. Her partnership with our development team really made such an impact, not only in board giving, but because of her investment as a volunteer in helping usher these gifts along, it enabled our development staff to go out into the community and focus on other major gifts, making an impact on another line of our contributed revenue for this year. So thank you to Jane Miller. Imagine if you're doing all of this cultivation and having direct conversations, how better poised you are to make that ask of either your CEO, your executive leadership team, or your board members at large. Next, Marty's going to cover exactly how to set up that ask.
Thank you, Michaela. I think this is where sometimes we think our job is done, right? If we've done an incredible job of establishing the expectations and we've worked on that buy-in, we think people should just be inspired and act, right? Wrong. Everyone deserves the courtesy of an ask. Even your CEO, even your board chair. Just laying out those expectations and cultivating them and engaging them in the process is not an ask. I cannot tell you how many times I'm talking with different organizations and they say, I'm just so frustrated, my board isn't giving. And I was like, did you sit down and explicitly ask them? Just like best practice in any ask, we need to be specific, we need to challenge them, and we need to personalize the ask, right? So let's be very clear in our intentions when we are setting up a meeting, whether it's with our CEO, with the board chair. Let's make sure that we're telling them, hey, I would love to sit down with you to talk about your personal commitment. We've been working really hard on establishing the expectations and getting everyone to think about what is going to be most meaningful to them. And I want to help you with that. That I think just sort of brings down those barriers of potential, like this is going to be awkward, right? Be very clear. Let them know what you want to do and that you're on their team, right? You're all in this together and you're there to help guide the process. But we have to make an explicit ask. Just saying do something that's meaningful to you or something that's significant for you and your family, I still am sitting there, well, I don't know, like you got to give me a starting point, right? That's exactly why we want to be specific in any other ask, right? It gives us a baseline to have that conversation. And we're always going to encourage you to ask high, right? So in the same way, you can let them know all of the things, just like any other donor, that could be made possible through their generosity, and that you hope that they would consider a gift of $50,000. And then be quiet. Be ready for hesitancy. Be ready for those objections, just like any other ask, right? So make the best ask that you can make based on the information that you have, the information that you have gathered about their personal situations, and then invite that conversation and be there to help talk through it, right? Sometimes people might say, gosh, I can't do that this year, right? Well, if you did a good job of asking and you put the dollar amount out, you sort of walk them down that path. Well, as you know, we encourage, most people are choosing to do a 3-year pledge. How does that feel? Well, I've been working on paying off another pledge, and work with them, that flexibility, make sure that they know you want to help them make their very best gift possible, right? Um, well, what if I'm a small business owner and I am my business, but really what I want and what's important to me is recognition for my business. I don't really care about personal recognition. I understand you want me to give as a board member. Talk about what that recognition could look like, how there could be, it doesn't matter where the gift comes from or where it is recognized, as long as it's meaningful to them, right? And as long as you're helping them make their very best gift possible. We want to make sure that we're following up and in stewardship, just like we would with any other donor. I think we oftentimes make the mistake of thinking, well, they sit in all the board meetings, they know all the information, they know the impact, but are we really truly making sure that they feel special as an individual supporter as well? Or, oftentimes I'm talking with people and they're like, well, I know about the impact because I'm on the board, but if I wasn't on the board, I'm not sure I would actually know about that. If someone's talking to you in that way, they're probably not truly being properly stewarded and recognized and thanked as any other donor. And we should be doing an even better job of recognizing, thanking, expressing gratitude, and stewarding them, because not only are they giving their time and their talent and treasure, right? So we want to make sure that we are stewarding them in the same way. For the CEO too, like, it can be really uncomfortable, kind of jumping back and forth between your board leadership, your volunteer, and your paid staff leadership, right? Both are important. Both need to happen early on and in an impactful way. So if we're talking about our CEO, and we could make the assumption, well, I mean, they know everything about the organization. So what else could I possibly share with them? Well, maybe we're like showing them what we're doing with other supporters. Maybe we're printing out an impact report or a newsletter or something and writing a handwritten note. Hey, isn't this exciting? Thank you for making this possible, not only as our leader, but as a supporter as well. Those kinds of things matter, and they really, really, truly can help them feel a part of what you're doing and understand that that is permeating throughout. Um, One little note, do you need external support? I mean, for our clients, it is not uncommon that we help with the ask for the CEO, right? Board chair, maybe the lead staff person is doing that, but oftentimes we're very happy to sit down and say, hey, all of the expectations and all the work that's being done, and we want to help you make the best gift possible. What we see and what we think might be a good starting point for you would be, $50,000. How does that sound for you? And that way they know that they're coming in at a place that, yes, they want to do their best, but they also don't really know. They don't have anything to compare it to. So, absolutely utilize your lead counsel as clients. Make sure that you are leaning into us to help with those asks if needed. We're always happy to do that. And I think that, sometimes getting the board chair to help with the CEO is possibly an appropriate thing as well, if you are just really uncomfortable making the ask to your explicit boss, right? So keep that in mind. Okay, so now that we've established, hopefully, how important it is to actually make an ask and be clear to your leadership, the top volunteer, the top paid staff person in your organization. How can we move forward to raise more from our board, right? Once we have been able to get the personal commitments of those two individuals, they can truly help permeate down in that peer-to-peer solicitation space. And that really, truly, the number one reason people don't give is because they're not asked. And the top deciding factor in, really, truly making the best gift possible is who asks, right? And sometimes peer to peer is by far the most effective way to get the best gift out of someone. If you, as the staff person, are asking all of the board members, you're probably not as tightly connected as some of their peers, right? So kind of having that knowledge of where those close relationships are can be helpful. But a great place to start is from that board chair. If you have a truly inspiring board chair, someone who is willing to say, this is what I've chosen to do, and I sure hope you'll join me at this level, it can be really impactful. So utilizing that peer-to-peer asking can truly help make sure you're not leaving money on the table and that you're getting the very best gift and ask possible. One of the things to keep in mind is having something of an expectation is important. We have an example here. Trustees will commit to making our organization one of their top 3 philanthropic causes, demonstrated by a personally meaningful annual gift and participation in campaign fundraising as applicable. I like this language. Sometimes people say, hey, we're just going to make a policy. Every board member has to give $1,000. Okay. Well, guess what? You have now set a level that could be too high for some people and a level that could be far too low for some people. And you've just limited yourself tremendously, right? So language like this is like, we know that we're prioritized within their giving, right? Because if they go out into the community and someone's like, well, what are you doing? They can confidently say, hey, this is one of my top organizations. I believe in it. I serve. And I also give at a very high level because it's meaningful to me, right? And so I like language like this. If you're considering putting something in writing, this is the way to go, right? Getting that top prioritization in there, personally meaningful, both from I'm going to support annually and, hey, I'm going to dig a little deeper and doing something a little extra when we're in campaign mode, right? So I think it's super important to make sure that you can optimize your board giving through something like that versus an explicit like dollar amount. There are some organizations that say, hey, you got to give or get this dollar amount or whatnot. I just think that limits you. So something like this is very, very impactful and helpful. Support your board with training. Okay, if we're going to ask people to do peer-to-peer solicitations to join us in that, we've got to show them the pathway. How do you do that, right? You've got to make sure that they know what we know, right? That being specific is actually helpful to the person you're asking versus saying, hey, would you consider this? Do something meaningful. I did. Well, that's great, but give me some sort of context, right? Make sure that you are helping them with the opportunity to talk through what an ask might look like. Having the ability to support your board through training. We do all sorts of training to help them feel really good about their role as a fundraiser. And that doesn't always mean explicitly being the one with the ask. They might be very comfortable saying, hey, I'll sit down with you with all the other board members, but I need you to actually make the ask. But I'd be willing to talk about why I give, right? So helping them understand that there are lots of different ways that they can be impactful in that peer-to-peer solicitation space, but that you've got their back and you can support them, right? Making sure that we're building confidence, we're empowering them, we're utilizing their ideas, we're helping them get comfortable with it. It might start with them being a part of like the stewardship process and the thanking others, right? Sometimes you try to ask someone to help with an ask and they're not ready, and you say, okay, great, then let's do some thanking. Let's recognize people. Let's do that. And then all of a sudden they flip and they start doing the asking because they get so excited about it, right? So give them opportunities to become a part of your solicitation by utilizing their strengths, right? By utilizing the things that they're comfortable with. And that all comes, y'all, with really, truly those individual conversations you have. I think the message here is you're able to optimize your board if you treat them as individuals and not just a group, right? If we say, hey, I've got a board, I've got to check this off the list, I'm going to set out the expectation, everyone's got to give, and you sit and wait for things to happen, nothing's going to happen, right? We want to lay those expectations, create the culture, but then individually we need to get to know them, what makes them tick, how they can be impactful, and challenge them to do so, right? But give them the tools and help them so that they can not only help inspire their peers, but also others out in the community. All right. Let's go to the final slide where I can just highlight some sort of next steps, get us thinking about, right? Consider what your current culture looks like, right? Our hope is that you have some takeaways from today that just meet you where you are. It may be that you're like, hey, I just have a few little tweaks I need to do. It might be like, gosh, I've got a lot of work to do. I got to go back to the basics. So let's look at what that culture, what is that logical next step, right? What is the appropriate next conversation to have with your board chair, your president and CEO? If they're both already giving, great, awesome. If you secured those gifts, that's awesome. If they're not, it's probably important you start somewhere. Hey, let's have a conversation about your personal commitment so you can help go out into the community with confidence and help us do more, right? Tie them back to that. How can you improve the stewardship of your board? When do they hear from you? If it's only when you're asking them for something, shame on you, right? Let's make sure we are finding those meaningful touch points, just like we do with stewarding all of our donors. Call them just to say thank you. Call them just to let them know about the person who is impacted this week by their generosity, right? Bring it, make it real, and connect with them, just like you do for all of your other donors. And when is that next opportunity to build in strong communications? What can we do? When can we make sure that we are being more intentional about the communications with our board and with our leadership so that it can permeate throughout? All right, I know I've gone a minute over already, so I'm going to move it on to questions. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop a chat so I can see, and I'm happy to invite you to unmute to engage in the questions. I am not seeing any chats. I'm also kind of scanning through. I don't see anyone unmuting themselves. Means we covered everything, really? We covered everything that came across your mind in this one?
If nobody has a question, Marty, I'll ask you a
Yes.
question that comes from my own personal background working in nonprofits.
Yes, Mary.
What if you work at a place where your president, CEO, executive director won't let you, as the director of development, talk to the board members? If
Great question. Has anyone experienced something like this before?
relationships.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, Mary. I think you kind of
Oh, okay.
cut
So,
out. Yes.
you know what? It's the snow. I'm coming to you from snowy Huntsville, Alabama. Hang on, I'm going to turn my video off because power's having trouble. What if
I think
I
the
work at
question,
a place?
Mary, I think we got the question. You just skipped through in the middle, but I think we did hear you, I believe.
Yes. So if we're in a place where we're not, us personally as the development director, let's say, allowed to interface with the board, and yet we know that they need to give, or the community will look to your organization with like, well, if the board's not even giving, I think that's an important conversation that has to be had with the CEO, right? If that's where the connection to the board is, then there has to be a conversation, a very frank one, about somebody needs to ask them. Just explicitly putting it out there is not an acceptable ask, right? It is, no very few people, if any, are going to actually raise up their hand and say, oh, here, I'm going to be the first one. So it's like you got to start somewhere and plant that seed. And so that's where you clearly would need to start. Another option is if you have a board, but there's an operator board. I'm not sure if sometimes there's like, but there's two boards, right? That having peer-to-peer intermixing between boards, encouraging each other, and empowering people to do that work together is helpful. Another way that sometimes it works is you got a major donor that you're close with who asks the question, hey, what's your board doing? Or I heard so and so. You're able to sometimes take that information, share it with the CEO, or ask them to feel free to have some of those conversations to help you help permeate in the most appropriate way. Just a few suggestions. Hopefully that helps. Karen, I see that you unmuted. Did you have a question?
Not a question, but just a statement, really, that it doesn't have to be an unpleasant experience soliciting your executive director. In my case, I noticed that her giving had lapsed, and I'm pretty careful about how you couch that. And I'm like, well, this is a gentle reminder that you as the executive director need to be giving, and I noticed that your contribution has lapsed. And her message back to me was, no need to be gentle about it. You're absolutely right. And I'm going to make that gift eminently. So it does not have to be hard when the CEO understands the importance and the role model nature of giving. I also find that board members want to know what each other has done. So start with the one or two that you think are going to give the most, so you can say, it's entirely up to you. What's important is that you give something that's meaningful for you. If you're looking for a range, here's the range that we have received this year and in the past. Sort of, they don't want to be the highest, they don't want to be the lowest. They want to know that they fit in with what their peers have done. And that works. In my case, it's a fairly grassroots middle of the, it's not a really high powered board. And so they do want to do their part and are curious what others have done as well.
Absolutely. And such a great point, because sometimes your board chair is not necessarily the one that's going to set as high of a bar too, right? So knowing who those people are and who you can use as the best example and who's willing to shout it from the rooftops versus be a little more, like you got to kind of take those nuances. And that's where there's no one size fits all, right? Every individual brings unique talents, and sometimes there's the ones that really truly are those influencers in a great way. So thank you, Karen. Great comments and great engagement. Appreciate everyone being on today. And with that, I just draw you to, please feel free if you want to chat with us, use that link and that QR code.